Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on if you're not in the US East Coast. Very early morning if you're on the US West Coast. Thank you so much for joining. Welcome back to Logtech Live. I'm Eric Johnson, the host of the show. When I'm not hosting the show, first and third Fridays of every month, I am the technology editor at the Journal of Commerce. But this is my favorite part of every month, getting to spend 45 minutes with all of you people. Thank you so much for everyone who regularly attends. And if this is your first show, a great one. I always say that, but it's always true. I have a great guest joining me today in just about 10 minutes to talk about a very hot topic these days, cross-border trade with Mexico and the technology that sort of empowers it. But before that, I have a lot to get through. Where do I start? Well, I guess I have to start with TPM, which is literally starting in about 48 hours from now. I will be on a flight out to LA from my home in DC later today. Super excited. I've been telling you all about it for months. It's finally here. We couldn't be more excited and grateful to the industry for supporting this event the way it does. I guess there's still time for you to register. You can register on site actually, but it's a little late in the day. Hotels are really hard to come by, but we'd still love to see you there if you can make it. But in any case, I will really look forward to the next show having kind of a bit of a wrap up of TPM tech within TPM, talk about what was talked about, what the big themes were. So make sure you tune in for the March 15th show as well, where we'll go through some of that. We are also less than 2 months away from the Journal of Commerce Break, Bulk, and Project Cargo Conference in New Orleans, April 24th through 26th. I'm leading some technology programming there that's going to be really good if you're in that space. And even if you want something else besides the sessions I'm doing, it's a fantastic event, pretty much the best event in that space globally in terms of substance of the content, the sessions. My colleague Janet Nodar puts together an amazing event every year, amazing program. So you can use the code that's scrolling down below to get 25% off a pass. So really hope to see you there. I also want you to take out your pen and paper or your sticky note on your laptop and put down this date. Two dates, March 25th. That is when we are going to open up registration for the JOC Inland Distribution Conference in Chicago later this year, which is October 30th through November 2nd. And I will have a lot more to say about this event as we get past TPM and get into the spring. I have a ton planned to blow this event much bigger and wider than it's been before. You are not going to want to miss this event, I promise. I've already had a couple dozen conversations with people. We're re-energizing, reinvigorating an already amazing event. It's going to be that much better this year. So just save the date, March 25th, registration opens. So get in early. You're not going to get better prices than if you get in early on the event this year. Okay. So one last thing before I turn to news of the week and then bring my guest on. Blended Pledge, please support it. It's in the comments if you want to find out more details. Perfect way to support getting people who are underrepresented on stage at our industry events, give them the budget, the wherewithal to actually make that happen when people like me invite people like them onto a panel and they don't have the budget to do so themselves. So definitely support the Blended Pledge. It's a great thing that Sarah and her team have been doing for years now. And that will be a big part of TPM as well. So we're really happy to partner with them on that. Okay, news of the week. So I wrote a story earlier this week about an initiative called the Open Visibility Network, hitting the pause button. Basically, the OVN was started by a guy named Kunar Kamani, who is the CEO of a company called Tive. We'll have him on the show at some point. Kunar's great guy. His company doing very interesting things in the IoT space, visibility space. He had the brainchild in the middle of the pandemic to try to get all of the big and small visibility providers in the market that were going gangbusters during the pandemic, get them together to create sort of an open network that made it easier for consumers to consume across all of the individual companies, right? Like a lot of these companies all the visibility providers have integrations with TMS providers, ERPs, PO management tools, right? Like they know the importance individually of being connected to the systems that companies are already using, but those were all one-to-one integrations, right? So the idea of the OVN was, let's make that work, which isn't necessarily something we should anyway be differentiating ourselves on. We should be differentiating ourselves on product, price, customer service, that sort of thing. Get together, make it easy for anybody to use all of the systems interoperably. Well, it didn't go anywhere, and not for lack of trying. I think it says a couple things. One, it's really hard to get competitors to sort of like down tools and agree to things like this, even when they have their logos all on the same page. And B, I actually attribute a lot of it to just sort of inertia from the industry. And by that, I mean consumers, shippers, LSPs. There's not enough pressure put on these individual companies to come to sort of common standards or common, infrastructure that would make it easier for them to use multiple systems. So it's sort of Groundhog Day, right? We're back where we started. Everybody doing point integrations, one-to-ones with everybody, and probably wasting a lot of time and energy. So just wanted to highlight that. Thought that was an interesting kind of development. Another interesting development last week, Flexport relaunched Convoy, not as a brokerage. Flexport has its own small truck brokerage. They launched it as a supply side app. So it's essentially the app that lured in all the drivers that were using Convoy to find loads from Convoy's shipper side of its brokerage. Now that tech has been turned on the driver side. So Flexport can use it as a broker. Other brokers can use it. It will be interesting to see how this goes. I think everybody involved with the relaunch of it has told me that Convoy's tech was great. That wasn't the problem in terms of it going bankrupt last year. Or should say they have not filed for bankruptcy, running out of money. That's what happened, actually. It was, and they were light years ahead of where Flexport was in terms of building their own kind of domestic truckload technology. So it's interesting to see the name reemerge so quickly. For those who didn't follow along back in fall, Convoy ran out of money. Flexport bought the proprietary tech and some IP associated with the tech that sort of underpinned the brokerage. And then it spent the last 2-3 months kind of getting it ready for prime time again as a standalone kind of technology piece. So we'll be following along closely. The industry is as well. And very interesting to see that name reemerge so quickly again. Last story I'll highlight is this is just the latest story that my colleague Bill Cassidy has written about the rise of cross-border trade between U.S. and Mexico. As I mentioned in the outset, my guest is very much involved in that market, so I wanted to have one story that leads into my discussion with him. My colleague Bill Cassidy has been writing a lot over the last few months about the rise in trade between U.S. and Mexico, how that's translating into truckload demand, and also the kind of infrastructure and product and services that established U.S. 3PLs are building near the U.S. border with Mexico or even in Mexico to serve that growing trade. So this is just the latest story, Ryder expanding their footprint in Laredo. But it was really just an opening to bring on my guest today, who is Deepak Chhugani, who is the CEO and founder of a company called Nuvocargo. Deepak, so glad you could join us today. Really appreciate you making some time.
Thank you for having me, Eric. Really excited to be here.
Excellent. So before Deepak goes into his backstory, and correct me if I have the timing wrong, but you and I first started talking, I think in 2018. I had just started with the Journal of Commerce like 6 years ago, around this time. And you were emailing me, and we were doing an event in Las Vegas at the end of that year called Logtech. First time we ever did it. And we met there, and you were like absorbing anything and everything from that event. So that's the backstory of how you and I first met. But can you give people a little background on who you are before we get into Nuvocargo?
Yeah, I mean, just to reference that story, it was I remember because it was a really memorable time, I guess, for me as a founder. I was in the process of pivoting away from my other idea. It was the end of 2018, and I was thinking of changing courses radically. And the JOC conference was actually really helpful in getting to know potential customers, people in the industry. And I still remember our conversations back then. So it was really, really interesting, a little over 5 years ago. So really, really fun. And you were very helpful. So I'm grateful for that. Just a little bit of my story is my parents are Indian. I grew up in Ecuador, and I was born in Africa and Kenya. So my story is very, very weird, I would say. I grew up there because my father left India in his late 20s to start a logistics business in Ecuador, which is essentially helping brands import goods from Asia and then helping them with the whole process of, sourcing suppliers, negotiating with them, purchasing the goods, doing the purchase orders, and then doing all of the international logistics and freight forwarding, and then even all the import, export, labeling to help them put these goods on their shelves. And this was kind of pre-internet days. And that's why I grew up in Ecuador, which is a really random story because there's no Indians in Ecuador. I think there's like 10 people from India in the whole country, at least that I met in all my time there. And like a good, Indian dad, my parents, they were, you're going to go to the US. We were never able to. We want you to go to school there, be a banker, doctor, lawyer. And to his demise, I'm back in logistics, basically. Basically, I studied, was really lucky to go to a small school called Bentley in the outskirts of Boston. That's where I did college. I spent all my childhood in Ecuador, in Guayaquil, and which is a port city, by the way.
Port city, right? Yeah, that's a port city.
Yeah. And then my first job, I did a few things in real estate over the summers and Wall Street. And then I was able to get a job in investment banking, doing M&A covering Latin American companies out of New York, and then eventually Mexico City. I did that for about, I want to say 2 years. And then I quit because I was really excited about the startup world. And that's how I started diving in. I did one idea in the recruiting space. And then when I was pivoting away from that idea, is when I met you. And now Nuvocargo is a little over 5 years old, or a little under 5 years old now. And we do US-Mexico cross-border logistics, and we're building software and a service offering to make that experience much better for shippers, for carriers, and for all the border service providers involved as well.
So a bunch of questions about Nuvocargo to start with. So before we even get to the genesis of it, I mean, you kind of described it a little bit. Are you a freight broker, cross-border freight broker? Are you a pure SaaS player?
No, we're a technology-enabled freight broker, right?
Okay.
That's the simplest way. We don't. I know I've watched a lot of the press and the debates online. I think we raise venture capital, but we've been very clear that that's our business model, and then we've complemented that with not just freight brokerage, but customs brokerage, a couple of other experiments like factoring for our truckers, a quick pay product. We do sell or resell cargo insurance, which I know other traditional players do as well. And then the software that we've built, the way that we've captured value from that, which is a more of a new thing, is now that we see the software has been so valuable for our own operations and some of our shippers, we also have a nascent transportation management business where we help some shippers with their US-Mexico freight. And sometimes that means they want us to take over all of North America because we are uniquely good at what tends to be one of the most complicated parts of their North America supply chain, which is US-Mexico cross-border freight.
So that would be like a managed trans offering, essentially, that starts from cross-border, but they could expand to domestic ops as well.
That's kind of the evolution now. We have a few contracts we've signed that are only cross-border. That's where we started. And I'm just seeing that naturally that means that shippers saying, hey, domestic freight is a little bit easier to handle and a lot of solutions are out there. Cross-border is where I trip up. and where we have, been fortunate to get growth and win deals from some of the large incumbents, because it's a very complex process. And I think a lot of their TMS platforms or their service offerings are not built for all the complexities of the southern border. And so then we're seeing an opportunity to help them with that, which is much more painful, and then potentially help them with domestic freight. But we're not trying to be a domestic U.S. freight broker. That would only be in scope when we work with more deep multi-year relationships with clients for managed trends, right?
And you're just to be clear, your customers are shippers, and
our customers are shippers.
So you're that classic.
We consider our carriers our customers as well, but
yeah, for sure.
Business are the shippers. Yep.
Yeah, got it. Okay. So we'll get more into that in a sec. I want to go back to sort of the genesis of the company. So you talked about pivoting to a couple different models. What was the light bulb moment in terms of like, this is the right model to address and the right market to address it?
Yeah. Honestly, for me, it was, and some people criticize the approach of like top down, bottoms up. Like we went through Y Combinator, and I've spoken a lot about this with the partners who see thousands of tech entrepreneurs pick ideas every few years.
Yeah.
And I think it was a combination of, I had a few friends that were starting to build interesting startups in the logistics world. And I had an affinity towards the industry because of what my family had done and where I grew up. So it was interesting to me, whereas it wasn't interesting to a lot of friends and fellow founders. I always saw it as this kind of the backbone of the global economy. It was really exciting and inspiring, and seeing startups getting built in the space. And then the other thing that I've always done, as I mentioned, whether it was investment banking or helping Latin American investors buy real estate in the US, I've always been at the intersection of the US and Latin America. I'm bilingual. Like, I love spending time in Latin America and the US. And so the more I researched, I said, I think there's an opportunity to address kind of trade between the US and LATAM. And honestly, most of 2019, we did a bunch of creative things. Like we acquired a small freight forwarder that was doing ocean and air from Asia, US. But our whole goal was, no, we want to, this gives us some licenses that take a long time to get, some know-how where we can shadow the operations and understand where software could add value. And that eventually evolved to, we really want to do US Latin America trade. And the more we sliced and diced it, it was US Mexico cross-border freight, such a big opportunity, and a unique trade lane, because it's international freight, but it's over the road, which those two things don't typically go together.
Right.
And that's why that's where we started. Kind of end of 2019 is when we really started moving cross-border freight, and we've been off to the races since then.
Yeah, interesting timing. So I want to circle back to the trade itself that you're serving, because that's there's so much. I mean, like, it's all over the news right now, and I would love to get like your unfiltered view of some of the things that are going on right now, and maybe straighten out in people's eyes what's really going on. Sure. But I do want to talk a little bit more about the model. So what were the inspirations for kind of attacking the like digitally enabled intermediary model? I mean, was it the Flexports and the Convoys?
I would say it was a combination of two things. I think one was definitely, seeing Flexport, Convoy, Uber Freight, and then all these models popping up in other geographies. That was really exciting. The other part of my genesis, like I said, is Latin America. So I had gotten into Y Combinator with my prior idea. I was building something for the US, but I was in all the WhatsApp groups with the Latin America founders. And when you speak with founders that are building startups in emerging markets, you also realize that pure SaaS models are really hard to make work, because the markets are typically not ready for them. Like shippers are just not, let's say, forget about shippers, just customers in general don't have the culture of paying for SaaS products. And so with that lens, it made a lot of sense to me. Like, hey, it seems like if you can be a full stack provider and make yourself more efficient with software and provide a better customer experience, that would work. And, I think a lot of people try to pretend they have all the answers. I was young, naive. I had no idea. So I took inspiration from what I saw, and we went from there. And that was part of the inspiration, right?
So just some editorial comment. I think that obviously we have seen to varying degrees Flexport, Convoy, Uber Freight, Transfix, all the kind of bellwether companies with that model.
Totally.
We've seen them struggle a little bit. I think it's interesting that people would sort of assume that the digital intermediary is either always correct or never correct, right? Like it's a black and white issue. Whereas, you brought up an interesting thing. Like some markets, SaaS works beautifully and people understand it innately now.
Yep.
Other markets, not so much. So some markets, people look to their intermediaries to provide them tech more than other markets, right?
Exactly.
Or that's turned away. So that's my sort of editorial. But like, was there anything that as you went from a very early company to now, or what are you in? Early stage growth? What
Series
somewhere in
B,
that?
yeah, early growth, whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
Somewhere in that area. But have you sort of been watching like what has worked and what hasn't with some of the other companies that have your model?
Yeah. I mean, people who know me well, including our investors, maybe to a fault, I've been obsessively interviewing people from all the companies that you mentioned and that you can think of. If I had to try to be concise with learnings and how we've applied them, I actually think I like what you said. I think a lot of people like to say it doesn't work or it always works, or they're like diehards of the model. Maybe this is my Wall Street background, but I think it's quite simple. Like most of these logistics service providers are valued in a certain way. They have 2 to 5% EBITDA margins. And that's without the cost structure of a tech company, right? So the promise of software and why you would raise venture capital is for two reasons, or maybe three reasons. One is you're trying to build a better experience through technology for your customers. Number two, because it's going to help you grow faster, so you can support the venture model. And number three, because you're going to have a better business at scale, which again, concretely in numerical terms means if a traditional player has 3% EBITDA, you have 5 or 6 or 7, right? And so just being very transparent, I think what I saw from the investor community and the startup community in the craziness of 2020, 2021 is people cared a lot about the first two. Is your experience better? Like, do you have a fancy UI? Does it look good? And then can you grow really, really fast? Even if those growth rates are potentially unnatural or you're subsidizing freight or all the things that people talk about in these articles. And the third one, which was, are you actually building a better business? I think that's the one that never got talked about. You were never held accountable to in the capital markets, and no one cared, quite frankly, right? And so we talk about it a lot with our board and our team, and we're like, I think we're lucky that we got enough capital that the company is very well funded, but we didn't build out like a Google-like product and engineering team, because I think that what we've learned is that the tech companies that paid all these big salaries and had these massive headcounts on the technology side, they had that first of all, they didn't have to then also build a logistics company. They didn't have two cost structures, and they had very high margins, fully automated. It's just a different business, right? So I think what we've learned is if you keep those principles of that third point in mind, like it needs to be a better business. And I've talked about this privately with tech-enabled service founders from many industries, not just freight. This is what we discussed. Like, you need to track your contribution margin. You need to make sure that not only are you making this a better experience for your customers with technology, but you're also making it a better business. And if you had to make that pivot, I think a lot of those companies had to make that pivot with gargantuan cost structures and a freight market that was turning. And they just had too many people to make it. We had to make team adjustments as well. It was not fun at all. But I think we've done it, and we have many years of cash. And now that we have that discipline in place, I think that I still believe that being a full stack provider, especially when you're touching emerging markets like Mexico, is a better model than being a pure SaaS player. But it depends on what you're talking about. There's some SaaS products that are probably going to work. So like you said, I don't think it's so black and white. And I think if you keep those three things in mind, is technology helping you, and venture capital, right? Helping you build a better experience, help you grow faster, and then be a better business, then it can work, right? If you can make those three things work. I'm not saying it's a guarantee, right? But we see a path to that for sure.
Still, lots has to break right, even if you get all those fundamentals right.
Yeah, for sure.
I think, and again, just to kind of contextualize this historically, I think very early, it's fair to say the early VC investors into logistics thought there could be a winner, or, an oligopoly kind of kind of structure to emerge. An Uber Lyft. I know it's trite to use that, but an Uber Lyft type like dominance. I think that matured to no, actually, this is way too fragmented for that to ever emerge. But it can still be so pervasive that it changes the cost structure and behavior enough for this to work. And now I think we're in a. I mean, when I hear focus on long-term profitability, I hear that's not a message that you hear in other forms of venture, right? It's more like, oh, this market actually hasn't changed all that much. It's changed in sort of subtle ways, but it hasn't completely transformed it to the way that maybe even like mid 2010 investors thought it might have. That's my pure kind of
I think that's right. And then again, we've spoken with a lot of investors because we've raised whatever $75 million of capital. We've met investors who knew freight, who didn't know freight, who learned it, studied it, were intrigued by it. I would just say that in the boom times, a lot of it was also if you had momentum, growth, and a large market, and people felt you could be different enough than the incumbents. I don't know that a lot of our investors were underwriting like you're going to displace everyone. It was more if you can compound over long periods of time, continuing to win business because your experience is better and then your business is better, then that was fine. But like I said, there is a difference between you're a pure SaaS company and no one needed to focus too much on cost discipline because the high margins and the scalability from day one pay for hide a lot of sins in your cost structures and your hiring and where you have the teams. I just think you need to be much more disciplined with this type of business. And that's the pivot that I'm seeing a lot of people try to make. And I think as they make it, if you have 300 engineers or whatever, it's really hard. Like it's tough, right?
That's a lot. That's a lot of burn.
Exactly.
Okay. I promised we were going to circle back to the market itself that you serve. We could have a conversation all about this for the rest of the time, but Crossborder is blowing up, and I can't. As someone who's not necessarily an expert in Crossborder and never has been.
Eric, sorry to cut you off. There was one other comment I wanted to make.
Sure.
Possible. The other thing I think the last comment that's really exciting in this new era of the last year or so, and I know it's a hype and people think it's BS, but again, when we get demos from YC companies or even what we're building internally, I think now it's also a new era. And people are not talking about this. They're just focused on like the failures of Convoy and all these companies. But can you build a multi-billion-dollar logistics company with a smaller tech team that's more impactful? I think you can because of what's happening with AI. And also if you generally have that impact. Like one thing I've sent to some people on my team is one of the selling points of joining Facebook in the early days was every engineer here is responsible for 1 million users. And that used to be exciting because you get to be one person on the technology side that is impactful for a large chunk of business. I think in 2021, it was, we have money, just hire everyone you can find and gobble up the talent.
Which totally cut against the whole month. Like you are telling your customers, we're going to help you do more with less.
Exactly. That's one of our new values.
And you're not taking your own advice. Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's a theme that's come up a lot on our show.
So smaller teams, and we tell our team, I'm excited for them. They're going to have a lot more impact. There's technologies that help them 5 or 10x their output, I hope. And all of them can have more equity. Like it can make things a lot better and still work. And then you have that full stack model, right? So sorry to cut you off. I just wanted to.
No. That's a great. We've talked about kind of tech that enhances engineering teams so that you don't need 300 engineers, right? So, okay, Crossborder. I'm no expert in Crossborder. I only know what I read and what my colleagues I sort of absorb from colleagues. It seemed for some reason, and I don't know whether it was to do with the hangover from kind of the pandemic disruptions, people feeling like international, transoceanic trade was becoming less reliable, which to a certain degree it did, but it didn't completely break apart. It just sort of got strained. But that transformed into crazy coverage of what's going on cross-border trade. And it seems like every week I see a new article kind of framing the data in a different way to show how much it's grown. Can you contextualize for me when you started in 2019 versus where we are now? Give me a delta for how much cross-border trade has grown?
Yeah. So I don't have the, I have the facts more thinking.
Even ballpark. Yeah. I don't,
Yeah. I think it's grown faster than GDP every year. But even in 2019, the reason that I got excited, and like I said, we did a little bit of top down, like we were excited to serve Latin American customers, US customers, and we said, wow, US Mexico trucking is so big, right?
Yeah.
It's like 9 million truckloads a year. It's $600 to $800 billion worth of merchandise crossing the border every year, depending on whose estimates you believe. So it was already very large, and Mexico was already a top 3 trading partner for the US, right? I would say I am surprised with how much coverage, like everyone tells us, oh, you know, macro and startups, but all the macro is in you guys' favor. I don't know if you guys planned it. I think people have been talking about nearshoring for a while. I am surprised at how the coverage has dramatically increased. And every year there's like a new reason for it. I think in the Trump era, it was the tariffs. So let's hedge with Mexico. Then it was the rising labor costs in China. Let's talk about Mexico. Then it was the pandemic. So let's talk about why Mexico, you know, it's closer, it's simpler. There was the new USMCA. Like all these things have happened while we've been running the company. And to me, the message is very simple. Since when we started and now, you're just seeing this long-term secular trend play out, which is if you can bring supply chains closer to the end customer because of, I don't know, 2-day shipping with Prime or just consumer expectations changing, as well as geopolitical tensions and just supply chain resiliency, then you will. But to answer your question on what's hype and what's not, like these things take years to play out, right? So we have been around for a few years, and we are seeing companies that were making investments in 2019 and 2020 now are moving that freight. And then we have people that started 1 year ago and are already moving freight, and others that will start moving cross-border freight in 3 years. But in general, it's such a big trade lane, and we're still such a small, young company that we just see it as like an exciting, nice trend, a good reason to talk about why Mexico is going to keep growing. But the market was already massive when we started, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and growth is better than the alternative for your for you, right?
Yeah.
Whatever the actual size of it is. How can you like put into some context, because this is something we've wrestled with a lot. We have sessions on this at TPM that you know your colleague is actually going to be part of on Monday or Tuesday. What proportion of kind of the growth in cross-border has come from like purely Mexican, manufacturing inputs, everything essentially happening in Mexico and moving into the US versus inputs from Asia that have moved into Mexico for final or some sort of critical like assembly?
Yeah, I think honestly, I don't have the data broken down like that, but what we see is in a lot of shipper conversations that we have, automotive is, everyone knows, is kind of the biggest industry in cross-border. And if any of the inputs for automotive can be brought to Mexico, there's already like a very resilient sector and supply chain. So that's one where I think people are just doubling down. There's others where, so that's one extreme. And then the other extreme is there's other things, and I've talked about this publicly. There's just the biggest challenge to nearshoring is going to be the talent pools and the skill sets. There's things like inputs that you make for iPhones that even if you want it or even if the cost is cheaper, is not going to be that easy to bring to Mexico because you don't have the talent pools that are making the different inputs into those electronics, right? We don't know how it breaks down, like how much of this is the tensions, the trade wars, how much of it is Mexican manufacturing. But what I can tell you is the numbers just keep growing every year, and every conference we're invited to for nearshoring, it's a combination, almost like 50-50 or 60-40 of companies that had a presence doubling down, opening more factories, and then businesses that are making net new investments. And when we go to conferences, including ones that are organized by you guys, almost all the meetings are either shippers that are new to cross-border or are growing in cross-border, having a lot of pains in the day-to-day, or they are seriously engaged in a project with a consulting firm or a nearshoring firm that specializes in helping you scope out facilities, and they really want to bring supply chains closer to home. And that's always a 9 month to 5 year project, depending on the complexity of that shipper supply chain, right? Yep.
It's such a difficult puzzle to unravel. Like, I mean, I have colleagues at S&P who, they look at this stuff, and there's some interesting reports about like how much has actually been quote unquote nearshored versus just sort of diverted through Mexico. But I mean, end result, like for your business, it almost, I mean, you need to keep track of it to know where like growth could come from. But
exactly.
whether it originates, whether everything happened in Mexico or whether it's being, diverted through Mexico, it turns into truckloads, right?
It turns into truckloads.
That's what matters for you.
It turns into truckloads, and then depending on how the shippers have set up supply chains with their consignees, we can add value in all of them. If they have it where I ship to Laredo and then we transload, or I keep it in a warehouse there, or I do door-to-door shipments, all of those, you benefit from our expertise, our software, our kind of vertically integrated offering where we do the freight, we do the customs, we give you border visibility and milestones that we don't see any other 3PL able to provide. That all breaks down at the border. So we benefit from all that stuff, to your point. And we do track the sectors, but there's still the main sectors, whether it's automotive or industrial or CPG, food and beverage, soft drinks. Like, these are very, very large sectors, and they only seem to be growing, right?
Yeah. So kind of dovetailing the tech with the market that you're serving.
Yeah.
When you think about what you need to provide to a customer, how might that vary from a feature function perspective from what a top 50 pure domestic freight broker might have to offer a shipper that's just moving purely domestic truckload freight in the US?
Great question. And sorry, my camera is getting blurry, like we talked about in the prep. I'm not sure what's going on.
All good. That's better now. It's all good.
So that's a great question. I was surprised myself because the more we've built, we'll join sales meetings and we will hear things like, we work with X player, top 5, top 10 player in the US domestic market. And that's a safe brand. And that's why they work with them. But cross-border, a lot of things break down and the experience is suboptimal. And we've learned over time, the reason for that is, like I said, US-Mexico cross-border trucking is a unique market because it's international freight, but it's truckload. So you would first go to the truckload brokers in the US who have a lot of capacity and a very large network. And they kind of simply add on the southern border. They make some partnerships in Mexico, and they can probably get you trucks, especially on the US side, at pretty competitive prices. But from a process standpoint, from a visibility standpoint, from reporting, and then exception management, a lot of things break down for them because the TMSs they've built or the workflow platforms they have, not to name names, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but we hear this a lot in our sales meetings. The big players that have built these platforms that they either give to their shippers or just use internally for their own operations, they're just not built for cross-border. And if you want me to be a little tactical, we can, where a domestic US truckload transaction is one shipper, one carrier, one driver. And the moment you add cross-border, like the US-Mexico border, you're dealing now with potentially, it's 2 trailers, 3 drivers, there's 3 legs, the Mexico leg, the US leg, the border leg. You have customs brokers involved. You might have inspections. You have insurance. You have a different currency, a different language. And all of the handoffs at the border create a lot of complexity. And these big brokers they're not going to change their processes and their systems for 90% of their business just to serve this 10% of their business better. And that means that the shipper for that freight typically has service failures, breakdowns. They don't know what's going on. And that's where we come in and we say, we have a purpose-built offering to help you with this part of your supply chain. And if you give us a shot, we will prove to you that the experience will be better and it will have tangible benefits, such as an average of 30 hours saved a month on less triangulations, because you're not dealing with 7 to 15 parties. You're just dealing with Nuvocargo because we are the freight broker, the customs broker. We do all 3 legs, etc. Single invoice, single operational data, better milestones at the border. We cross the border an average of 33% faster, in some cases much more, with some of our best customers, where they show up and like, is it normal that my freight is around for a couple of weeks or a few days? And we think it's not. And they don't know why. We're tracking the handoffs between the carrier, the customs broker, and we're looking at all of those things to really reduce border crossing times. And so it leads to cost savings. It leads to a better experience and less day-to-day service failures for this piece of their supply chain. And that's why people use and work with Nuvocargo, for our expertise and our centralized offering. And all of that is powered by our software, where we accommodate all of the unique permutations of a US-Mexico cross-border shipment, whether it's northbound, transload, or direct trailer. This one has to stop in Laredo, this one stops in Nuevo Laredo, and that changes how you invoice it. Our software accommodates for all of that, and that just leads to a better experience for our shippers and our carriers.
So when you were describing that, it it had echoes to me of, I used to cover the TMS market. I mean, I still do, but I used to cover it a lot, and you used to see domestic TMS providers that were like top of the line, you know, for handling truckload, LTL, even some parcel, try to, you know, kind of fit that into like an international environment and really struggle, right? Like it was, you know, users had problems with it because
exactly,
you know, different mode, customs, internet, you know, languages, currencies, all that stuff, business rules, different.
exactly.
One last quick question. We were talking about this just before going live. In your experience, the person, so if I'm a shipper,
Yeah.
and I'm managing a large US domestic network, but I also have this growing component of cross-border, is that typically the same person, or is there a person or team that's specifically dedicated to cross-border? Or do they need to manage both of those?
On the US domestic side, like, sorry, the US decision maker, we've
Yeah.
observed it tends to be the same person. And then it depends on how they've organized the company. Some shippers will tell us, we think of this as a separate division. And, you know, for example, we'd like you to run it under a managed trans, or we can give this all to you because we want an expert for this, and then someone else for LTL and someone else for FTL. And then for others, it's they want to use fewer brokers for everything North America truckload. And so we run into both scenarios. And then on the Mexican side, it's a little different because a lot of Mexico, if you're dealing with cross-border, that's the bulk of the business. It's not,
Sure.
it's not primarily Mexico like the US side. So it really depends. But typically that's what we're running. We're running into is we will speak with the decision maker and we'll help them either solve that piece of the puzzle, but then the business model and how we work together depends on how they've organized their supply chain.
Yeah, understood. Okay, last question. Now, this is my real last question. I ask this of every guest. Who's your favorite band or musician? And you have to tell me why. This is the hardest one for everybody. So
it's hard because I listen to music all day, but the first one that jumps out at me is Coldplay because all of their music reminds me of when I was younger, just excited about everything. And so it's optimistic vibes, I guess, from Coldplay. Yeah.
it's a great one. I was just talking last episode, I think, about how we haven't had no one's gotten 2 votes, essentially. Coldplay, I think, is the first band to be named twice. So
Wow, nice.
they're unofficially in the lead as the Logtech live house band. So
they're great. Viva la Vida is amazing. Great song. Yeah.
That's one of my son's favorite songs. So well, Deepak, thank you so much. This has been awesome, really good. Hopefully everyone got a good picture of why you built Nuvocargo and where it is right now, and especially where the market is right now. Best way to reach you is?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Dejukani with 2 H's. Or, you know, if anyone's moving cross-border freight, we'd love to help you or answer any questions at deepak@nuvocargo.com, or I think in the banner below, you have our website. We'd love the chance to help you simplify this very complex problem, just like we're helping very large global brands. So we're really excited to help you.
Cool. Well, we'll see you soon. All right. So glad you could make it today.
Take care.
Bye. Great weekend. Bye. Cool. Deepak's a cool guy. When we met, he was, you know, it was a very interesting time because he was like super excited about this business. It's cool to see, you know, 5 years down the line where it's gone. All right. So last thing, of course, dad joke of the week. This is the last pre-TPM dad joke. What is it called when you kill a bunch of chickpeas? If you really think about this, you should get it. A homicide. How's that one? Is that good? That's like a real good dad joke. That's not like a kid joke or that's just a pure dad joke. Hope you enjoyed that. You're welcome to use it all weekend long. Okay. We have reached the end of another fantastic episode. These go so fast. Thanks to Mike DeAngelis for chiming in. Mohammed and Amit, thank you as well for listening in and commenting. Thank you to everybody who listened in. Hope it was informative for you. Support the Blended Pledge. Go to the comments and click on the link. Give $5, give $500, give $5 million, whatever you can afford. It's a great cause. I will see you all in, I hope to see a lot of you in Long Beach in just a couple short days. Safe travels if you're going. Otherwise, keep in mind New Orleans break bulk and project cargo event in April. And remember, March 25th, save the date, comes out. Save that date. Registration for JOC Inland comes out that day. So thank you again for everyone to tune in. Thank you to my show producer, Nicole, the best in the business. Thanks to Sarah and the whole Let's Talk Supply Chain team. I'll see you in 2 weeks with another great show.